Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining. My name is Michael Corson. I'm the manager of customer success here at TipHaus. Today, we're going to be talking about some exclusive training for GMs. This is really for anybody who maybe just needs a refresher on what we talked about in your onboarding, or maybe you're fresh to the company that uses TipHaus and you just need some extra training. We're going to make sure that you're up to speed, you know where all the buttons are, you know what everything does in TipHaus. We're also going to make you aware of some support buttons and some ways of reaching out if you need some one-on-one support going forward. A little bit about what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to go through some webinar housekeeping, tell you how you can interact with the webinar, how you can post questions and that kind of stuff. Go over some goals, some things that we want everybody to learn. The main bulk of the meeting is going to be talking about the TipHaus overview. What are the main pages? What can you do on all the main pages? How does TipHaus interact with your data? What can your employees see? All that fun stuff. We're going to go over it. Navigating the client dashboard is going to be a big piece. The employee app is going to be a big piece. We're also going to talk a little bit about some payroll options. So how you might put tips on paychecks, how you might pay them out electronically. TipHaus has some great options for you. And then lastly, we're going to have a Q&A. So as we're going through here, feel free to interact with the chat. You can use the comment sections just to say, hey, please go in there and just say, hey, I'm so-and-so, I'm coming in from wherever you're coming in from. Also feel free to post questions. So if I'm moving fast, if you want to go into more detail on something, post a question there. We'll make sure to get to it after the call. And then if you have to hop off for any reason, don't worry about it. We'll have a recording available after the webinar. Also really useful if you have somebody who just maybe isn't here right now, but after this webinar, you think, wow, this would be really good for another member of my staff to see. Definitely we'll have that recording available for you. So into the bulk of today's meeting. So what is TipHaus? What does it do? What do I need to know? How do I use this product? I want to answer all those questions. We're going to start by kind of hopping into what we call the client dashboard. As a GM or as a business owner, as somebody who's kind of managing the tips for an entire location, this is where you're going to be coming in day to day to kind of get your work done. Now, there's 5 pages here. There's the home page, which deals with kind of metrics and data and analytics. If you're really into insights and viewing your data in interesting ways, it's going to be a great page for you. There's tip distribution logic, where we build some rules, where we tell the system what to do in an automated kind of way, so that when you come into TipHaus, everything's ready to go for you. We have the breakdown page. That's where you'll actually get the information once it is ready to go for you. And then we have the reporting page where you can see raw data as it would exist in your POS and in your time tracking softwares if you use those as well. So basically a place to view your sales and view your shifts. And then we have settings where you can do some really interesting things, including invite your employees to the employee app. So with that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and share a different screen here. And we're going to take a look at the client dashboard together. So this is the client dashboard for a demo account that I have set up. This account has 3 locations. If you work at a restaurant that only uses TipHaus at one location, you would see that location here at the top. If you have more than one location, and you have access to that as a GM or as an admin, you can always drop it down and select which location you want to view. Now, the settings within Bogey's Bonanza are going to be different than the settings within Quixote Valley, different than the settings within Seagull Stacks. You can think of these as kind of separate accounts in a lot of ways. The sales list and the employee list and the shift list at Bogey's Bonanza will be different than the other locations because those are different restaurants in this scenario. So I'm just going to keep it kind of filtered for Bogey's Bonanza. And we're going to go through our 5 main pages on the left-hand side, and then we'll touch a little bit on that 6th page, which is a payout page at the end here. So I'm going to bring this out. If you view what's on the menu here, you'll see those pages that I just went over, including an ETA page, which we'll go over at the end. Kind of from a high level here, I kind of want to walk through this in terms of how the data arrives at TipHaus and then go from that point. So in terms of where we see raw data coming in from your POS or from your time tracking software would be in this reporting page. So if I come down to reporting, you'll see right across the top, we have sales listed here. All the sales exactly as they would be listed in your POS. You can view this by date. You can view this by pay period. You can filter this for different employees, different job codes. You can target specific sales, specific employees. And it's really just showing you a list of sales as they would exist in your POS. It's quite a nice, clean interface. Similarly, we have work shifts. These are going to be a list of shifts as they exist in your POS or time tracking software if you're using something like Homebase for your employees to clock in and out of. It's really just a direct pull of data that comes into TipHaus. One thing to be aware of is in TipHaus, you'll see a couple buttons that kind of exist on multiple pages. One is export. So if you want to export the data, go ahead and do so. And the other one is this little kind of camera lens icon. And this is showing an expanded view or showing a more compact view. If I show an expanded view here, just to give you a sense of the kind of level of data that TipHaus receives, we'll see the employee who made the sale, a sale ID, a payroll ID, this would be an employee number that you might use for payroll purposes, the job code, so what role was the person working when they made the sale. In this case, revenue centers. This is something we can turn on and off depending on your POS. If you need something like that, let us know. And then more importantly, kind of individual tender data, or sales data. So the total tender on the check, the subtotal of the check, the tax, the credit card tip, the gift card tip, the service charge. This is all stuff that TipHaus receives. We also pull the open and close time of the check. Again, some POS systems don't give us quite to this level of detail, but most give us a clean open and close time, which lets us do some really fun, interesting stuff. And then we can actually see the check itself. So you could come in here and see, on this date, at this time, this server rang up a iced coffee and a lemonade for someone. This is the category that these were in, the price of individual items, which again lets us get really, really specific when we start to make calculations. Now, once we build rules, you're going to see distributions. On these checks, to the right here, you see a distribution. So you might see something where this check has $8.42 on it, and you want to see exactly which rules did TipHaus flow through, and exactly who got a cut of that $8.42. You could open it up, and you can say, hey, this was a bartender sale, so it went into the bartender pool and went to the 2 bartenders that were working at that time, who were Albert and Rachel. They each took 50%. Accounting for the entire 842. So you can always come in here and view this at this kind of level. It's oftentimes a little bit more information than you want to see day to day, but if you ever do want to get this specific, you definitely can come in here. Now, similarly, we pull in work shifts. All the information you'd expect to see on a work shift will be here as well. The most important thing in TipHaus is that your employees are clocking in and out of the right job codes at the right start and right end times. So long as they're doing that, we'll have good job code information and we'll have good time worked information, which is going to be crucial for every kind of calculation that TipHaus does. So when we talk about job codes, just to clarify here, it tells us not only what kind of minute the employee is working, but it tells us what type of sales that employee has. So you might think of it as, Daphne here is a server. She's going to receive from the rules for her time worked as a server based on ways that we set up in the next page that we're going to look at. Similarly, her sales are going to be called server sales in our system. And so we'll have rules that say, okay, what do we do with server sales? Well, we give them out to people who worked bartender minutes for the drinks they make, or for cook minutes for the food they make, something like that. So these kind of job codes, you can think of them as tags in TipHaus, and they're going to be really, really fundamental. So everything kind of stems from these job codes and these clock-ins. So ideally here, what TipHaus is doing is we're just looking in your POS system, we're looking into your labor systems, and we're pulling in the shifts, we're pulling in the sales, and you're just kind of living your life as normal in your POS. TipHaus is pulling in that information every 15 minutes, and we're updating calculations so that at the end of the day, your whole process is come into TipHaus maybe at the end of the pay period and grab a single number to put on the paychecks. Or maybe come in the next day and pay out electronically through our electronic payment system. Really, really simple, designed to cut kind of every human element possible out of the process to make sure that things are clean, hands-off, automated, all that good stuff. Now, you might be thinking, okay, well, what if I made a change to data in TipHaus? Is that going to go mess up everything that I have in my POS? You'll notice edit buttons throughout both these pages, this little edit icon here. You could come in here and you could change a job code. You could add a clock out time. You could do something like that. You could change a clock in time. If you make a change to something in TipHaus, it will not affect anything in your POS, and that is true of all edit buttons throughout the program. It is a one-way street in terms of integration. So in most cases, if you want to update something, maybe Alan here clocked in as a dishwasher, but really was a cook. Just go to your POS or time tracking software, update the shift with the right job code. TipHaus will automatically pull that in, will automatically recalculate, and it'll be ready for you fairly quickly. We're syncing generally every 15 minutes, and then maybe taking 2 or 3 minutes to do the calculations after that. Now, as your account gets bigger, as you're using more sales-based rules and that kind of stuff, you may see sync times start to stack up and get a little bigger. We are working on keeping those down, and we're always working on keeping those as fast as possible. The rest of the tabs on this reporting page are breakdown snapshots. This is historical data. As a GM, you may care about this, you might not. If you're in an owner type, this may be more important to you, but basically as pay periods end and they get finished up, we'll generate snapshots of the data. That'll show, what everybody brought in and what everybody took home. Really useful if you were to, hopefully this never happens to you, but if you were to get audited, you could come in here and say, hey, here's exactly what we had in terms of calculations. Here's the data we were working with, and compare that to what you paid out to your employees, and generally be on a route to getting through that audit as fast as possible. So this stuff lives here for you in the background. We also have peer-to-peer. This is a feature you can turn off if you want that allows employees to kind of share money between each other. We're not going to talk about it in too much detail today, but if you are interested in peer-to-peer, definitely click the Help Center up in the upper right. There's an article on it here, or click the chat button that you'll see on your side in the bottom right. We can talk about peer-to-peer with you one-on-one if you'd like. So big picture, reporting page is data directly as it stands in your POS with a little bit of extra detail in terms of sales. Now, what do we do with data that comes in from your POS and your time tracking software? We send it through the tip distribution. And so this is that automation piece of TipHaus that we talk about. It lives up here in this tip distribution page. As a GM user, you're not going to have access to edit these rules, but you can click on them and get some more detail, right? If you do need to make a change of rules and you're a GM user, we just need to reach out to one of your org admins and get permission from them, and we can help you make adjustments to those rules as you see fit. Now, there's quite a few rules in here that are built out just as examples. From a kind of high level setting here, tip sharing rules happen first and tip pools happen second. So what that means is a bartender might tip out a busser 5% and then take the, in this case, they're actually tipping out a cook and a lead cook as well. After they tip out those folks, they'll take whatever tips they have remaining as a bartender. And if they're included in a tip pool, they would put that money into the tip pool. So in this case, bartenders take whatever's left over after they tip out the cooks and lead cooks and bussers, and they put it into this bartender pool and they split it up with all the other bartenders who are putting their tips in the pool as well. So that kind of tip sharing first, tip pooling second allows us to do a lot of fun stuff. You'll notice a few things in here. Pardon me. So any of these tips in blues, they give direct percentages of tips in terms of 5% of whatever credit card tips you rang in, or service charges, or gift card tips. Anything that's in orange is going to still give out from tip sources, but it's going to make the calculation based on how much was sold. So in this case, cooks don't make money based on how many drinks were sold. They're only getting tipped out 1% of how many appetizers and desserts and entrees were sold. So you can mix and match with these kind of tip sources and tip calculation kind of methods and get some really interesting results. If you feel like you have a really interesting idea and say, hey, I see the way the last GM had this set up. I love it, but I want to make some tweaks. I have some interesting things. Reach out to us. We're happy to help. We can generally make just about any tip idea you have come true if we get a little clever with these rules. We can also do things like control the frequency, which is basically controlling the window of time that we're looking at when making these calculations. You see these have a daily frequency. That's saying, okay, take a look at all bartender tips through the day. If the sale closed in the day, take 5% of the tips on that sale when coming up with a number. When we look at bussers who are going to take money, take a cut of that 5%, it says, okay, do we take busser minutes from a specific time, or do we take any busser minute through the whole day? In this case, if you worked as a busser during the day, you'll get a cut of any bartender tips that were made during the day. We can get as specific as you want here. The most specific option of this would be kind of what we see on the bartender pool here, which would be a time of sale frequency. So this says, we know the open time of a sale, we know the close time of a sale, we know the tips that were on the sale and what's left over after the tip sharing rules. Take whatever number that is, but only share it out to bartenders if they worked time during that sales open to close window. So you can think of this, if you're the only bartender on the clock, you put your money in the pool, but you're the only one working during your sales, so you keep all those tips. Maybe there's 2 bartenders on for the middle of the day. Any sale that they both work on, they would get a cut of that sale based on their time worked during that sale. So even down to the level where if I worked 1 minute on the sale and you worked an hour of the sale, you get a 60-minute cut and I get a 1-minute cut. As one of us gets cut, and maybe you're the only one there for the end of the night, those sales that you make at the end of the night where you're the only one on, you put all those tips into the pool, you're the only one working in the sale, and you get to keep those tips. So again, we can mix and match, we can do all kinds of fun stuff. I don't show you cash rules in this scenario, but we can also handle cash. So if you want to have your staff turn in cash tips and have TipHaus make those calculations too, we can do that as well. So this is the automation screen. I'm just scratching the surface here. So if you have more questions about this, or you're thinking about maybe changing the tip policy for your whole restaurant, get in contact with us, click that chat button. We can help out with your specific scenario. Now, once all these calculations are run and those sales come into the reporting page, they run through the tip distribution and everything gets calculated, it spits out onto what we call the breakdown page. And the breakdown page is kind of the meat and potatoes of TipHaus. So this is where you'll find everything you need for payroll, everything you'll need in terms of calculations, and a more high-level breakdown of tip distributions than what you'd see on the reporting page and kind of a sale-by-sale look. So looking at the breakdown, you'll notice that TipHaus only has filters for yesterday and then the current and last pay periods. The reason being is we wait until the business day is done, and then we make the calculations for that day. So yesterday, we'll have all the calculations for the previous business day. As soon as July 9th ends, tomorrow when you wake up on July 10th, all your calculations will be there for the previous business day. And so you can always kind of think about being able to pay out at most, the soonest possible would be you could pay out today for the previous day's tips. If we look at yesterday here, you can see we can sort by last name, first name, job name, all clickable. And then we can also search in this row 2 of columns 1, 2, and 3. And you could say, I just want to look at Ryan, or maybe I just want to look at bartenders. So lots of good ways to kind of pinpoint information. You can also view tipped employees, so somebody who rang in a tip or is owed a tip at the end of calculations. Or you could view all employees to say, just show me anybody who interacted in the POS. Maybe there's cooks in there who don't make a tip, and maybe you don't tip out your cooks, so they don't have a take home. They would be on that list as well. Now, I'm going to sort by job name here. I'm going to take you through a couple things that are kind of interesting on this dashboard, but mainly just kind of show you how things read left to right so that you're confident when you come in here, what am I looking at in all these columns? And the first thing I want to point out is that we don't expect you to remember exactly what's in all these columns. We give these little blue eyes, these little tooltips throughout the product, and they're going to show you, if you hover over them, what is in that column or what is in the feature that you're looking at. So in terms of total sales, total tips, total service charges, these are raw things that we pull in from your POS. Also hours worked, stuff that we pull in. This is pre-calculation stuff. It's just saying, Albert, as a bartender, rang in $254 in sales, had $31 in tips, 0 service charges, and 8 hours worked. Now with that, we use that to put in things through the rules. And so you can see he has a tip share net here. If you click on anything blue, you're gonna get more detail. In this case, his tip share net was giving out a little bit of money to the cook, right? If you were to click even further in here, you could see individual checks and see which checks were involved in that calculation and which cooks got a cut and how much they got a cut of. You see here it goes down to the 10,000th of a dollar. So really, really granular, really, really exact. Then you'll see tip pool. So after the tip share net, he's going to put his money into the pool and he's going to take some money out of the pool as well. So his net between what he put in and what he took out was $19. All the bartenders are going to have a little bit of a different one. You see this third bartender on the list made way more in tips, so put way more into the pool. But then when balanced out against hours worked, took out another amount. So when you read this left to right, all you need to worry about is taking total tips and total service charges, plus or minus the numbers in these columns, would give you the take home. Now for some of you, you might have something called a credit card tip fee, which is basically charging back a portion of credit card transaction processing costs to your staff. So if you're paying credit card transaction costs every time a card gets swiped or something like that, a portion of that is applied to the amount of credit card tip that was left. We can back out a percentage for you and handle that piece if you'd like. If you're not familiar with credit card tip fees, it's not legal in every area. It's not something you can do, but if you do need it, we can handle it. So in those cases where you are using a credit card tip fee, same idea, total tips plus total service charges, plus or minus the numbers in the tip share net and tip pool net, minus any credit card tip fees that the employees need to turn in, gives the amount that they're owed, which is this take home number. So the end goal of TipHaus is always that take home, and that's the amount that they're owed after all calculations are done and any deductions are made. So in an ideal world here, you go into your POS, you live your life, you log sales, your staff clock in and out, You come in and you say, oh, everybody clocked in and out perfectly. All sales were exactly what they needed to be. And this take-home number is what you would put on the employee paychecks or what would get paid out to the staff. So TipHaus does this all pretty hands-off. Now, in cases where you might say something like, managers shouldn't have tips or something like that at the end of all this, we can give you some notifications. You would see maybe an invalid take-home notification. In this case, we have an events employee that's taking home some tips. And this just says, hey, for some reason, all the tips that were under this fake employee didn't get sent out, or all the tips that were under this manager that we tagged didn't get sent out. It gives you a nice warning. And then you can go take a look at why they have those tips. This is one of the biggest questions we get in TipHaus is why would somebody take home tips if we have all this automation? The answers are generally pretty simple. Most of the time, the answer is there was nobody clocked in to receive the tips in the way we set up. So maybe managers are supposed to give 100% of their tips out to the support staff and the hosts and the cooks, but maybe none of those people clocked in on a day or everybody called out sick or something like that. In those cases, there's nobody to give out to. And so the manager would retain the tips. And we just give you a nice notification so you can come in and deal with the problems. You won't see these very often. But there's also a notification you might see that says miss clock out. And that would just say, hey, somebody clocked in during the day and at the end of the business day came and went and they never clocked out. We would give you a notification about that as well. Really just dealing with those kind of warnings as they come up. And again, click the chat button. We can help you with it. It would be about all you need to do to run TipHaus day to day, right? Coming up to the homepage, this is where you would handle things like data analytics and things like that. So you could configure this dashboard however you want. We actually had a webinar on this subject as a whole. It's definitely more of like a bells and whistles type thing. This is extra stuff that we can get out of TipHaus, but fun nonetheless, and really interesting if you're really interested in making database decisions. It's kind of an example here, just get your wheels turning how you might use this. Take home per hour by job code. This would show you for each job code in your system, how many tips per hour that job code is taking home on average over whatever date range you're looking at. So really useful when you're trying to hire a bartender and they say, what kind of tips do they make? Rather than making a guess or something like that, you could come and target a Friday and say, on Fridays, they take home about $15 an hour. Or you could target a month range and say, over the last month, they took home this amount of money per hour. So really interesting stuff. You can see how you might use that to do job postings or handle interview questions or that kind of stuff. You can also kind of target leaders here and say, who's getting the highest tips on average? Kirsten's leading the pack at a 22.9% tip average. What is Kirsten doing different than Daphne at an 18.6? So we're not going to go into too much detail here, but click around. Feel free to use these data points however you see fit. There's some interesting stuff in there. Last but not least, the settings page. You'll be able to view your employee list, your job code list, your sales item category list, just things that we pull in from the POS. You'll be able to view your users, so who has access to TipHaus. You'll be able to see your org admins. In this case, I only have an org admin here. You'd see a list of GMs, which stores they have access to. If you are an org admin in TipHaus, you could manage that kind of stuff. If you're a GM access in TipHaus, you'll be able to view it. And then again, we have some export buttons and things like that. I want to draw your attention to the actions button. In terms of the actions button, you can invite employees to join the employee app. You just click invite. And whatever email that we have coming in from the system, we would send the invite to that email address. If you want to edit it and add a new email address in, you can do that as well. They get an invite and it says, hey, go to this website, plug in your email address and get registered, and you can see your own tips in a nice little neat package. There's also pay period settings. One thing to be aware of is TipHaus doesn't reprocess back in time forever. We'll go back as far as 2 pay periods. And you'll see the open pay period. That means TipHaus is actively grabbing information every 15 minutes. This previous pay period is locked. And so TipHaus is saying, hey, payroll has been run, it's locked up. We're not going to make any changes or pull in any new data for that pay period. And maybe somebody comes to you on July 9th and says, hey, back on June 26th, I forgot to clock in. Is it too late for me to make changes? Definitely not too late to make changes. You could definitely unlock the pay period. Again, this would be an org admin only thing, but just ask your org admin, they can help with it. Now that it's unlocked, you can make the adjustment to the shift on June 26th. You can pull in that information into TipHaus. and we would recalculate. You'd be able to take what you paid out for that pay period and compare it to what should have been paid out, and then make any adjustments as you see fit. So really easy to unlock and recalculate past data and do some interesting things there. As a last little bit here, before we move on to the employee app, which will be really quick, you'll see a sync button in the upper right. If you don't want to wait for these 15-minute syncs to happen, you can always come in and just choose the date you want to sync back to. That'll pull in the most recent data set and start calculating right away. You also see the help button. There's a tour on each page, which takes you through all the buttons that I'm talking about. And there's also a help center full of awesome articles. Your most important tool in terms of support is going to be the chat button in the bottom right. Go ahead and click that. Reach out. We can hop into one-on-one calls. We have a team. We're really responsive. We try to keep it under 10 minutes for initial response times. We do some limited weekend support. So over the weekend, you'll get answers within 24 hours, and then really good support during the weekdays. Reach out, ask questions. We can give you simple answers. We can go as far as to hop into your account. We can hop into your account with your org admins. We can adjust rules. We can really help you through this. So you're never alone in TipHaus. We're not just tossing you into the system and saying, remember all this stuff. We're really here to work with you. So let us know what you need. I want to show you really quickly a little bit about the employee app here. And I just want to kind of cover 5 main questions, and then we're going to talk very briefly about payroll, and then we'll get to your questions. So these are the main questions we see about the employee app. So what do my employees see in the employee app? Will my employees be able to view the tips that their coworkers are earning? What if my employees work at more than one location? Can org admins and managers access the employee app? And what value do you see employees getting out of this app? I'm going to answer these all by just showing you what's in the employee app, and I'll show you exactly how this works. So I have the employee app set up for a person here who works at 2 of our locations. If an employee works at 2 of those locations, up here on the right, they'll be able to switch between them. And so all they need to do is have the same email address at each location in that settings menu, and it'll automatically give them access so long as those are in the same organization in TipHaus. Now, if we're viewing Bogey's Bonanza, it's really showing you the exact same thing you see on the breakdown. In your view, you see it as a table, kind of like an Excel spreadsheet. In their view, they see it more like a banking ledger. So again, they see their own tips, their own distributions, their own kind of stuff, but laid out kind of in a nice vertical row or vertical column. They don't get enough information to answer the question, how much are my coworkers making? Which generally leads to the next question of, why is my coworker making more than me? But we do give them enough to understand how the tips are being sent out, how the calculations are being done, and all that good stuff. So if you come in here, you start to see the value of this right away. If you look here, this person gives out some money through TipShare. We see which job codes they gave to, so we can see that they gave to a cook, but we don't see which cooks are taking the money. Similarly, if she was receiving, Georgiana would see, which job codes gave her money, but not which employees gave her money. So it walks that line between anonymity and transparency. We also give them a view into their shifts, which leads to a view into their own metrics. So how much are they taking home per hour over a date range? Really interesting question to ask when you're talking about, how much do I really make while I work at a restaurant? Not something that's really easy outside of TipHaus, really, really easy to grab for employees here. Peer-to-peer would be here if you want that turned on. They would sign up for Earn Tip Access, which we'll talk about really briefly here in a second. And then most importantly for you, they get their own kind of view into the tip structure. So if you're tired of employees asking you, how do I tip out to the cooks? Or what's the percentage that I'm giving out? Or why this seems high? Why did I tip out this much? There's a tip distribution settings button right here, along with help articles that describe some stuff about TipHaus. If you go to tip distribution settings, you'll see the rules that are in place at your restaurant. So they can come in and say, hey, manager, how do I tip out to the cooks? It seems like I gave out too much. You can say, hey, go to tip distribution settings in the employee app and look for yourself. And it'll show them 1% of appetizers, desserts, and entrees to any cooks that work during the day. So that's how much you're giving out. Not going to answer all the questions for them, but it's definitely going to help keep some questions off your plate. This is definitely a fan favorite for most of our GMs. Lots of good stuff in the employee app. We're not going to spend too much time on it in this meeting. What I really want to get onto is kind of your payroll process. So this will be really quick. Your process is going to be 4 steps. You're going to look at the breakdown page and make sure there's no missed clockouts, make sure there's no invalid take-homes or anything like that. Take care of them by editing the information in your POS. Resync if you've made changes, or you can let TipHaus think it through if you're not minding waiting. and then export from the breakdown. So very, very clearly, you come in here, you go to the last pay period, you'd say, okay, I fixed my invalid take homes. You could resync and start pulling in the data and the changes you made right away. And then it's really just this blue export button. And we can make any kind of report you want here. There's custom payroll exports we can build for you. We put whatever columns you want in here. But you just kind of select that pay period, export it, and send it off to your payroll company. And that's all you need to do. So ideally, that's your whole payroll process. We do have an ETA page, which allows you to make payouts as you go. So if you want to come in here and pay out electronically, there's a little bit of a business sign-up process where we say, hey, are you a business that is an actual business in the US? Who are your owners and do they sign off on this product? You link a bank account and then you get your employees signed up. And when you click this payout button, they get money pretty much immediately in about 5 minutes onto either a card that they open with us or onto an existing card that they link. So if you're interested in ETA, definitely reach out and ask about it. Lots of value. Lots of value for the business and also for the employees. The big ones for the business is, anytime you can get your tips faster to your employees, the happier your employees will generally be. And then from the employee side, obviously they get access to their money faster. So really easy and completely free for the business. So if you're interested in that, reach out. We can definitely help get it set up. It's an awesome program. We got tons of people using it. Not something you have to use by any means, but something that is very cool. All right, it's enough of me talking. Let's get into the Q&A. Before we get into the Q&A, I do want to point out this kind of QR code. Go ahead and scan that and leave us a Google review. If you take a screenshot and send it to our VP of Marketing, Tanya Rolkova, we'll give you a $25 Starbucks gift card. We definitely want to hear what you think about TipHaus. Leave a review. We always read them. We always try to reward people who give good reviews and respond to people who give negative reviews by just getting better. So let us know how you're feeling about TipHaus. We definitely want to hear from you. With that, I'm going to come back to StreamYard and kind of go through some Q&A stuff. All right, looks like we got some really good questions. So, Paul, I'm going to show a question here on the screen. Are we able to adjust anything if we see an error on the sales? So, we do have a feature that we can turn on in TipHaus that allows you to refund credit card tip amounts or subtotal amounts in TipHaus. In most cases, the easiest way to handle this kind of stuff is just to make the change in your POS and let TipHaus bring it over. So if you refund something, you'll see it'll get a big red exclamation point and it'll say, hey, you had something in here, it got refunded, and now there's a new total, and the calculations will automatically adjust. If you do need to do it in TipHaus for some reason, you definitely can. Just be aware, remember, it is that one-way street scenario. So if you were to adjust a sale or adjust a shift or something like that, it's not going to change it in your POS right away. Sometimes that's desirable, sometimes that's not. Definitely, any number of ways we could adjust a sale in TipHaus. If there's a really tricky situation that we can't get around in the POS or in TipHaus, I can promise you there's generally a way for us to get around it if we just get a little bit creative. So click the chat button and we can help if you're getting stuck. Let's go down to Jackie. Hi, Jackie. Do you have to resync TipHaus manually, or will it do this automatically every 15 minutes like you just said? The sync schedules in TipHaus are a little bit more complicated than me just saying every 15 minutes. But in general, for the last several days, it's going to do it every 15 minutes. Further back in time, it's going to do it at least once a day. So TipHaus is always grabbing new information. We're always doing that kind of stuff. I'd say if you ever go into your POS and you make a big bunch of changes, if you're in any kind of hurry, if you're in any kind of rush, go ahead and click the sync button and just grab the most recent set of data. That's definitely going to speed things up for you. But generally, yeah, we are syncing every 15 minutes for data. So we can get into any specific cases. Jack, if you're having any trouble with your sync times or anything like that, or wondering if I made a change in the POS, when's it going to get into TipHaus? The sync button will be your friend. As soon as you click it, you'll see rules processing. As soon as rules processing stops finishing, you can know that your data is going to be there and it's going to be included in the calculations. It's a really good question. Valerie, towards the end, would it be possible to see how to set up servers or bartenders for pooling again? So I believe this question, Valerie, let me know if I'm not getting this right. I believe this question comes down to kind of the order of operations. I come back here. When we talk about tip distribution, could you tip out to bussers or something like that, and then have the bussers take those tips and pool again, or add like another layer past this? That's not possible in TipHaus in this way. And in most cases, it's just not needed. When you tip out to somebody, you can kind of think of this 5% as being a busser pool in its own way. So if this 5% comes out to $100, it kind of goes into a pool where the busser's minutes worked are taken into account. So they each would get a cut of that $100 based on their time worked, which in a lot of ways is how a pool works. Now, if you're ever in a situation where you need to tip out to bussers and then have bussers take that money and then pool that with other people, instead of putting an extra pool in place, we can just put extra people into the rule itself. So you can say, bussers take a cut of that 5%, but so do cooks, and so do expos. And maybe they don't all take the same amount. Maybe bussers take twice as much per minute as the other two. So we can get really, really specific with this. We can also say things like, hey, try to give to the bussers and the cooks and the expos, but if there's none there, give it to the dishwashers because they're going to be picking up the slack. We can have fallback group after fallback group. We can do points in these fallback groups. So I've just scratched the surface on these rules, and I really meant that. There are a lot of features here. I've yet to see a situation where we would need to tip share and then pool again or something like that. But let us know what situation you're having. We can definitely take a look. Once you submit, TipHaus starts recalculating, and generally a few minutes later, you have your answers, your numbers. Let me know if I missed the point on that kind of question. But if that is what you're asking, that is how that would work. Paul, are there any sales or timekeeping platforms that TipHaus is not compatible with? There are a lot. If you've been in the restaurant industry for a while, there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of POS systems, ranging from small to big. We try to work with all the major players. We handle most things. For time tracking, we also handle quite a few of the major players. If you go to the TipHaus website, you should be able to see some of the ones that we integrate with right off the bat. If you have a specific one you have a question about, feel free to reach out to us in the chat. We can let you know. If you have a bunch of restaurants waiting in the wings on a POS system and you want us to build an integration or something like that, we can definitely bring that up with our product team too. Valerie says, is the employee information linked to the scheduling platform for information, or will they need to be manually added? It is different for each POS system. So most POS systems, most labor systems send us the employee name, the payroll ID, and the email address. That is not true for every one of them. So if you're in a situation where you connect up to TipHaus and you're saying, hey, where are all my employee emails? I see them in the POS. Why are they not here? It could be that you're in a product that doesn't send that information. No need to worry. We have a manual import function. So all you need to do is send us kind of a list of employee names and email addresses, and we can import them into our system for you in mass. Pretty easy. You can also update those one by one if you prefer, depending on your employee list. That may or may not be desirable. Andy Adams, is there a video to share with employees that explains the employee app? There isn't a video right now, but in that last page of the employee app, there is a help center. And the articles in there are very descriptive. They have descriptions of every page and every button there. That's generally been enough for us, but our next kind of phase of customer success moving into probably the beginning of next year, we'll be offering content as many ways as possible. So articles or live support with us or a video. It takes time to build that kind of stuff, but it's definitely on our radar. You're not the first person to ask, so we'll be working on that as well. All right, we got 3 questions left here. We'll get through them all. Vulcan says, I had an issue with TipHaus not pulling job codes recently created through the POS system. Any recommendation where to look for mistake or troubleshooting that we can do internally? This is an awesome, awesome question because it has a very specific answer to it. So let me share my tab here. When it comes to pulling data, and this is a little bit more specific than I was planning on getting on this call. When it comes to pulling data, we pull sales and shifts every 15 minutes. So we're going to pull that information in. You can see, we just pulled in information and rules started processing right now. So you'll constantly see this kind of stuff happening. We didn't find anything new. It reprocessed, and here we go. It's ready to go. So you kind of just saw this thing happen in real time where there's not too much to pull in. When it comes to the information you see on the settings page, so employee lists, job codes, sales item categories, revenue centers, these are things we just don't see updated all that often. So it's not like you're going to add a new employee to your system probably every day, probably not even every week, right? Same with job codes. But maybe you're a new restaurant, or maybe you're changing things up, and you are changing things up quickly, and you are adding new employees, you are adding job codes. Do be aware this kind of information here, because it doesn't change that often, we only pull it in every 24 hours. So at the beginning of each business day, you'll find the stuff you built on the previous day. Because this stuff is so specific, we do have in settings here an actions button where you can resync on demand. So if you add 6 job codes and you come in here and you say, it's been 15 minutes, I'm not seeing them in TipHaus. Don't panic or anything like that. That's the way it works. Come here to settings, come to job codes, and just resync. Hit yes, and we'll pull in that information for you. Generally in about 5 seconds for that kind of stuff. It's really quite quick. Now, if you still see problems and you click sync and you're not seeing something come in like that, reach out to us. We are pretty well versed in all the POS systems that we integrate with. So we might be able to even hop in on a screen share and take a look at your POS together and make sure there's not an issue with how something's set up. But in most cases, this sync button is going to solve it. It's a really good question. I'm going to go ahead and share one last QR code. This is for our next kind of office hours. It's not really a webinar. It's more of a chance for you to hop in and kind of talk with me and with other customers. We're going to be talking specifically about payroll. So we can talk about any ETA questions you might have. We can also talk about, building custom reports. What kind of stuff can we add to a report? What kind of stuff can't we add to a report? What kind of formatting can we do? All of the kind of things that might interrupt your payroll process would be appropriate to bring this meeting. So if you want to sign up, go ahead and scan this. There'll be other sign up options kind of sent out over the next little bit. But at the end of the month here, we're going to be meeting and talking. Definitely a chance for us to bring you on stage. We can hop into your actual accounts and we can kind of talk together and kind of learn from each other's situations. So really fun stuff. Also, feel free to go to our YouTube channel. We just did one of these last week on events, or 2 weeks ago on events. And we just kind of talked about different approaches to sales that might fall outside of your standard server and bartender sales. So if you're interested in learning about events, don't worry if you missed it. You can just go to the YouTube channel and you can see that there. So go ahead, scan that. While you're doing that, let's answer the last 2 questions, or 3 questions, and then we'll hop off. Tom says, we like to look back occasionally to see how tips compare. Is it possible to be able to access more than a year's data from the home screen? It is not possible at the moment. Let me make sure that's still true. We're making some pretty big adjustments to this in general. I'm just going to check. Yeah, so on the homepage, it is limited to a year. We are working towards getting the ability to go back towards your lifespan with TipHaus. So something that's not ready yet, but something that will be possible in the future. So great question. Not ready yet, but it is coming. Stuart Lee, if I had set up a rule to tip out 2 scheduled hosts, if I only have 1 host, could I make it so the servers only tip out on half of the rule? We do have kind of some ways of doing that tiered system. It's not something I have time to get into right now, but Stuart, if you're interested in kind of building a tiered system based on staffing amounts and how many of a job code are on, there's some pros and cons to that. There's some reasons that the rules kind of expanding and contracting based on staffing kind of makes sense without that kind of approach. But if you need it, definitely reach out through the chat button. We can schedule a specific time for you and me to talk about that and kind of go forward from there. A little bit more, let's put probably a 15-minute conversation at least. So we'll get into that, just you and me, if you want to book a meeting. Abby Elliott, this will be our last question for the day. How frequently can you change the rules? Daily, before or after a pay period only? Depends on what you're doing for payouts. There is a method of changing rules where we deactivate your old rule set and then create a new rule set to take place starting on a specific day. With that, you could go as often as daily. Just be aware that when you change a rule, it will recalculate back to what's called the effective date of the rule, which you set up when you're creating one. So if you change a rule, it's going to recalculate backwards in time unless we tell the system not to. There's a really good article in our system called How to Change Rules Mid-Pay Period. You can go in there and it walks through kind of the deactivation and activation process if you don't want a rule change to apply to previous day's data. So the answer here is it takes a little bit of management and a little bit of careful creation in terms of rules, but it can be done daily. So yeah, great question. All right, with that, I think that takes us to the end of our time. I just want to say thank you. Feel free to reach out. Feel free to contact us. The best ways to reach out to us would be support@tiphouse.com or through the chat button in the bottom right. But any way you reach out, you'll find happy people ready to help you. We're always looking for ways to answer your questions, to help you, to make sure you're getting the most out of TipHaus. If at any point you feel like that's not happening, reach out. We're here for you. Beyond that, keep an eye out for more webinars, keep an eye out for office hours, sign up for these kinds of things. If there's something you want to talk about that you think would be a good topic for us, definitely reach out about that too. Reach out to marketing, and we can see if we can get a webinar on the books covering the topics that you want to hear about. All right, that's enough from me. Thank you all for joining. Have a wonderful day, and we'll see you next time.